A blast of wind rattles the panes of the main house, a sound like a skeletal hand clawing at the glass. From her late husband's oversized armchair, Eleanor Vance watches the encroaching blizzard consume the last of the bruised afternoon light. The sky and the land are becoming one vast, churning entity of white. It is a lonely sound, a lonely sight. Out there, her cattle are huddled, their backs to the gale, and in here, she is just as exposed. Since Arthur's passing 6 months ago, every opportunistic rancher and slick-tongued banker from Redemption Peak to the Flats has come calling, their condolences thin veneers for their avarice. They see a widow, plump and alone, sitting on the most prosperous land in the county. They see a prize to be claimed, not a person to be mourned. The latest, a ruthless man named Sterling, has been the most persistent, his proposals sounding more like threats. The storm is a fitting mirror for the siege she feels upon her life. That's when she sees it, a shape, dark and stumbling, emerging from the white fury at the edge of her property line. It collapses near the fence, a heap of buckskin and desperation. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The figure does not move again. Eleanor knows the code of the West is simple and brutal. You help, or you leave a soul to the elements. Leaving a man to freeze is a sin the land itself wouldn't forgive. She pulls on Arthur's heavy oilskin coat, the scent of him a faint, painful memory, and steps out into the screaming wind. She finds him half buried in a drift, his face a mask of ice and frozen blood from a gash on his forehead. He is a mountain of a man, lean but broad, with a tangle of dark hair and a beard frosted with his own breath. He was unconscious, his life flickering like a guttering candle. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she dragged him back to the house, his dead weight a testament to the life still inside him. For 2 days, he lay in the spare room, lost in a fevered haze. Eleanor cleaned his wound, spooned broth between his cracked lips, and listened to him mutter fragmented words of shadow and snow. On the 3rd morning, the blizzard broke, leaving the world pristine and silent under a blinding sun. She walked into the room to find him awake, his eyes, a startling, clear gray, fixed upon her. He tried to sit up, his muscles protesting with a groan. "Where?" His voice was a dry rasp, like stones grinding together. "My ranch." "You collapsed in the storm." She kept her voice even, offering him a tin cup of water. He drank it greedily, his gaze never leaving her face. He took in her full figure, the practical dress, the competence in her hands. He saw a woman who was not delicate, not girlish, but substantial. "Solid. You're Silas Kane, aren't you?" The trapper from up in the high peaks. He gave a curt nod, his eyes dropping to his battered hands, then sweeping the room, noting its comfort, its warmth. He was a man accustomed to none of it. "I owe you," he rasped. "You owe me nothing. Just rest and heal." He shook his head, a stubborn set to his jaw. "I don't take charity." He pushed himself to sit fully, the effort costing him. His buckskins were worn thin, his gear meager. He had nothing, less than nothing. His gaze met hers again, stark and stripped of all pride. A raw desperation swam in their depths. "Let me remain," he implored, the words raw and torn from him. "I've got no place else. My camp, washed out in a flash flood 2 weeks back. Lost everything. I can work. I'm strong." He looked around again, at the solid walls, the promise of food, of life. Then his eyes settled on her, the solitary widow. He made a calculation born of utter destitution, offering the only currency he believed he had left. "Let me remain," he repeated, his voice dropping lower, rougher. "And I'll bed you." The words hung in the air, crude and shocking. Eleanor felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck, a mix of insult and a strange, unwelcome pity. Men had offered her marriage for her land, partnership for her money, but no one had ever offered her this. It was a barter of the most primal kind, shelter for flesh. It should have disgusted her. It did, on some level. But looking at the fierce, broken pride in his eyes, she saw not a lecher, but a man pushed to the absolute edge of his existence. A man who had so little left he was willing to sell his own body as if it were a pelt. She thought of Sterling and his condescending smiles, his assumption that she was a helpless creature who needed his management in all things, including her bed. Silas Kane's offer, for all its coarseness, was brutally honest. He wasn't pretending it was for her benefit. It was for his. She straightened her spine, the mistress of the house once more. "Mr. Kane," she said, her tone cool and deliberate, cutting through the tension. "You will do no such thing. My bed is my own." She saw a flicker of shame, of resignation, in his eyes. He thought he was being cast out. "However," she continued, "the roof is sound, and the work is hard. I have a bunkhouse for my hands, though it's empty now. I'll give you a place there and 3 meals a day. In exchange, you will work for me. You will mend the fences the storm took down, you'll help with the stock, and you will do anything else I ask of you. Is that understood?" He stared at her, confusion warring with relief on his gaunt face. He had offered his body and been met with a job. He had offered her shame and been given a measure of dignity. He swallowed hard, the motion visible in his throat. "Yes, ma'am," he said, the words quiet, respectful. "It is," and in that moment, an unspoken contract was sealed, far different from the one he had proposed, yet just as binding. The mountain man would remain, but the terms of his stay and the nature of their debt were now entirely in her hands. In the weeks that followed, Silas Kane became a silent, tireless presence on the Vance ranch. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a life lived without waste. He rose before the sun and worked until long after it had set, his energy seeming to come from some deep, inexhaustible well. The north pasture fence, which had been a splintered wreck, was repaired with a sturdiness that surprised her. He had a way with the horses, a low murmur and a steady hand that calmed even the most skittish mare. He never spoke of his offer in the spare room, and neither did she, but it lay between them, a quiet, humming thing, a line drawn in the sand. Eleanor watched him from the porch or the kitchen window. She saw the deep weariness in his shoulders at the end of the day, but also the fierce satisfaction he took in a job well done. He ate his meals in the main house, at the far end of the long dining table Arthur had built. The silence was often thick, punctuated only by the scrape of cutlery on plates. Yet, it was a different kind of silence from the one she had grown used to. It wasn't empty. It was occupied. It was the silence of two solitary people sharing a space, each respectful of the other's borders. She started leaving a plate of biscuits and a jug of coffee on the stove for him in the mornings. He never acknowledged it with words, but the plate was always empty and the jug drained when she came down. One evening, she found a perfectly carved wooden bird, a tiny, intricate thing, sitting on the porch rail. She knew it was his work. It was a conversation held without a single word. He was paying his debt in labor, but he was thanking her in silent gifts. Her world, once shrinking, began to feel secure again. The presence of Silas, strong and capable, was a bulwark against the encroaching world. But the world had a way of pushing back. One afternoon, while riding the property line, she was intercepted by Jedediah Sterling. He sat atop his gleaming black stallion, his suit immaculate despite the dust of the trail. "Eleanor, my dear," he began, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "I see you've hired some help. A rather feral-looking sort, isn't he? Mr. Kane is a hard worker, Mr. Sterling. That's all that concerns me." Of course," he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you must know the talk in town. A widow, a woman of your stature, living out here alone with a mountain man. It's unseemly. People are saying you've taken a buck to stud." The vulgarity of it struck her like a slap. It was a crude echo of Silas's own desperate offer, twisted into a weapon of shame by a man who considered himself a gentleman. "What people say is their own business," she said, her voice tight with fury. "And my ranch is mine. For now," Sterling said, his smile tightening. "But a woman can't manage a place like this forever. You need a husband, a partner. My offer still stands, Eleanor. Marry me, and I'll get rid of your stray." He gestured dismissively toward the ranch. "Get off my land, Jedediah." His face hardened. "You'll regret this stubbornness. You'll come crawling to me when that animal you're keeping finally shows his true colors." He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and impotent rage in his wake. Eleanor returned to the house, shaken and angry. That evening, the silence at dinner was heavier than usual. She found herself studying Silas as he ate, his focus entirely on his food. He was uncivilized, perhaps. Uncouth, certainly. But she had never once felt threatened by him. She had never felt like a prize he was trying to claim. He treated her with a quiet, unwavering respect that was more valuable than all of Sterling's polished courtesies. A few days later, the threat escalated. One of Sterling's foremen, a burly man named Riggs, rode up to the house while Silas was out checking a line cabin in the high country. "Sterling sent me," Riggs said, not bothering to dismount. "He's making a final offer on your northern herd. $10 a head. That's half what they're worth," Eleanor said, standing her ground on the porch. Riggs spat a stream of tobacco juice near her boots. "It's the price you pay for being stubborn. And for keeping trash like that Kane fellow around." He let his eyes roam over her figure in a deliberately insulting way. "Though I can see why a big woman like you might need a big man to handle things." Before she could respond, a low voice cut through the air. "That's far enough." Silas had emerged from the woods, silent as a shadow. He held a hunting knife in one hand, not menacingly, but with a casual familiarity that was far more threatening. His gray eyes were flat and cold as river stones. He didn't look at Riggs. He looked at Eleanor. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm fine, Silas." Only then did his gaze shift to Riggs. He took a slow step forward. "You're on private property. You've insulted my employer. I reckon you have about 5 seconds to turn that horse around and disappear." Riggs, who outweighed Silas by 50 pounds of muscle and fat, sneered. "Or what, mountain man? You gonna stick me with that pig sticker?" Silas didn't answer. He just started walking toward him, his expression unchanging, his pace deliberate. There was a deadly certainty in his advance, a promise of swift, brutal violence that Riggs, for all his bluster, recognized instantly. It was the look of a man who had seen the worst of things and was not afraid to visit them upon others. Riggs's bravado evaporated. He yanked his horse's reins, sputtering a curse, and spurred the animal into a hasty retreat. Silas watched him go, then calmly sheathed his knife. He turned to Eleanor, his face softening with concern. "He didn't touch you?" "No," she whispered, her heart still pounding. "He just talked." Silas's jaw clenched. "No man has the right to talk to you that way." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in his gaze she saw more than the gratitude of an employee. She saw a fierce, protective loyalty. The wall between them, the one built of circumstance and that first, crude offer, seemed to dissolve just a little. That night, she didn't leave his dinner at the far end of the table. She set a place for him right across from her. The incident with Riggs changed the rhythm between them. The shared silence became less about boundaries and more about companionship. They began to talk, not about anything of great importance, but about the small things that make up a life. He told her about tracking elk in the high country, about the way the stars looked from a mountain peak. She told him about her love for the land, about the plans Arthur had for the ranch, plans she was now determined to see through. She discovered he could read, not well, but with a slow, careful determination. She started leaving books for him in the bunkhouse, histories, almanacs, even a book of poetry. One evening, a late frost threatened her newly planted vegetable garden. She was out with lanterns, covering the delicate shoots with blankets, her fingers growing numb from the cold. Suddenly, he was there beside her, his large, calloused hands working alongside hers, their movements efficient and synchronized in the flickering light. When they were done, they stood for a moment, their breath fogging in the frigid air. "Thank you, Silas," she said, her voice soft. He just nodded, his gaze on the covered rows of plants. "You work too hard," he said gruffly. It was the closest he'd ever come to expressing personal concern. "So do you," she replied. "Why, Silas? Why do you work so hard? Your debt was paid long ago." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes shadowed in the lantern light. "This place," he started, then stopped, searching for the words. "It's the first real home I've known since for a long time. You gave me that. Not charity. A chance. A man works hard to protect his home." The word hung between them. Home. He didn't just see the ranch as a job or a shelter. He saw it as she did. It was a profound admission, one that deepened their connection more than 100 pretty speeches could have. She felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the lantern she held. She was beginning to see the man he was, not the desperate vagrant who had stumbled out of a storm, and she found herself liking him very much. She was also beginning to realize the danger of that liking. To let him into her life was one thing. To let him into her heart was another entirely, a risk she wasn't sure she was prepared to take. Sterling, however, was determined to force her hand. His campaign of intimidation moved from veiled threats to open hostility. He dammed a creek upstream, cutting off a vital water source to a portion of Eleanor's pasture. When Silas rode out to investigate, he found two of Sterling's men guarding the makeshift dam. They were armed. Silas didn't provoke a fight. He simply studied the dam, the terrain, the position of the men, and rode back. He explained the situation to Eleanor with calm precision. "I can take the dam down," he said, "but they'll just rebuild it." "He wants a confrontation. He wants my land," Eleanor corrected, pacing her study. "He thinks he can bleed me out, scare me into selling or marrying him." The thought was revolting. "There might be another way," Silas said slowly. He pointed to an old map of the county on her wall. "See here? The old survey markers. Arthur told me once that the original boundary lines were contested. He believed this whole section," he traced a finger along the creek, "was improperly ceded to the Sterling property a generation ago. He said the paperwork was filed in the territorial court, but he never had the time to pursue it." Eleanor stopped pacing, her mind racing. Arthur had mentioned it, but she dismissed it as old rancher gossip. "You think we could challenge his claim? If the papers are there, the dam isn't just an inconvenience. It's on your land. He's trespassing and stealing your water." It was a long shot, a gamble that would require a trip to the county seat, a journey of 2 days. It would mean leaving the ranch vulnerable. "He'll know we're gone," Eleanor said, chewing on her lip. "He might try something." "Let him," Silas said, his eyes hardening. "We'll set a trap for him to walk into." His plan was simple. They would make a great show of packing the buggy for a long trip, telling the stable boy in town they were heading to the capital to see a lawyer. But instead of leaving, Silas would double back under the cover of darkness, hiding in the hills overlooking the ranch house. Eleanor would remain, a lone woman, the perfect bait. "No," she said immediately. "It's too dangerous for you to be alone." "It's more dangerous for you," he countered, his voice firm. "I won't leave you here undefended, and I won't be used as bait in my own home." The argument was their first real one, sharp and charged with the fear each felt for the other. In the end, they reached a compromise born of stubbornness. They would both stay. They would fortify the house and wait. They sent a trusted young neighbor boy to the county seat with a letter to the marshal, explaining the situation and asking for help, knowing it might be days before he could arrive. For now, they were on their own. They spent the next day preparing for a siege. They barred the windows, stockpiled ammunition for Arthur's old rifle and Silas's repeater, and brought water in from the well. The work was grim, but as they moved through the familiar rooms of the house, a new kind of intimacy settled over them. They were no longer employer in hand, but partners in a desperate defense. That night, they sat in the darkened parlor, the rifle across Eleanor's lap, the repeater leaning against Silas's chair. The familiar house felt alien, a fortress waiting for an attack. "Are you scared?" Eleanor asked into the darkness. She heard him shift in his chair. "I've been scared before," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Fear keeps you sharp," he paused. "What I am is angry, that he thinks he has the right to take this from you, to terrorize you. He thinks I'm weak," she said, more to herself than to him. "A plump widow, easily frightened, easily bought." "He's a fool," Silas stated, the words flat and absolute. "He looks at you and sees acreage and cattle. He doesn't see." He trailed off, and the silence stretched. "Doesn't see what, Silas?" she prompted gently. "He doesn't see the woman who dragged a half-frozen man out of a blizzard and saved his life. The woman who runs this ranch better than any man in this valley. The one who covers her garden from the frost in the middle of the night." He finally turned his head, and she could just make out his silhouette against the faint moonlight from the window. "He doesn't see you." Her breath caught in her throat. In that simple, unadorned statement, he had seen her more clearly than anyone, even Arthur, ever had. He saw her strength, her substance, her spirit. The word, plump, was a description used by men like Sterling to diminish her, to define her by her shape. Silas saw her shape, but he defined her by her actions. Before she could find her voice, A sound from outside shattered the quiet, the splintering of wood. The corral fence. They were here. The attack came just as Silas had predicted. Sterling and 4 of his men, led by Riggs, rode into the yard not like thieves in the night, but like conquerors. They were loud and arrogant, expecting to find a terrified woman who would quickly capitulate. "Eleanor," Sterling's voice boomed. "This foolishness is over. Come on out and sign the papers. I've had my lawyer draw them up. A fair price for the ranch. Be sensible." From the darkened window, Eleanor and Silas watched them. Silas raised his repeater, his aim steady. "I can take Sterling from here," he murmured. "No," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but firm. "We will not be murderers. We are defending our home. That is all." "Eleanor," Sterling shouted again, his patience wearing thin. "Don't make me have my men drag you out." This was the moment. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor moved to the front door, unbarred it, and stepped out onto the porch, holding the heavy Winchester rifle. She was alone, a solitary figure illuminated by the moonlight, looking every bit the vulnerable widow they expected. Sterling's face broke into a triumphant smile. "Ah, there you are. See, common sense prevails." "There is no common sense in this, Jedediah." Eleanor's voice rang out, clearer and stronger than she'd felt possible. "Only greed and cowardice. You are trespassing. I am ordering you and your men off my property." Riggs laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what, fatty? You gonna shoot us all by yourself?" Before Sterling could silence him, a second voice came from the shadows of the porch. "She's not by herself." Silas stepped out of the darkness to stand beside her, his own rifle held loosely, ready. The sight of him, appearing as if from nowhere, wiped the smiles from the men's faces. They had expected to corner a lone woman, not face down a man who looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. Sterling's face contorted with rage. "Kane, I should have known. You've poisoned her mind, you filthy squatter. She would have been mine if not for you." "She is not a piece of property to be owned," Silas said, his voice dangerously low. "She is a woman who makes her own choices. And she has chosen for you to leave." "I'm not leaving without what I came for," Sterling snarled, reaching for the pistol at his hip. It was the mistake Silas had been waiting for. But it wasn't his shot that rang out first. It was Eleanor's. She didn't aim at Sterling. She fired into the wooden sign above his head, the one bearing the Vance Ranch brand. The sign exploded in a shower of splinters, the sound of the Winchester echoing like a cannon blast in the night. The horses shied, and Sterling's men flinched back, their bravado shattered by the shocking display of defiance from the woman they had so thoroughly underestimated. "The next one," Eleanor said, her voice as cold and steady as the rifle she held, "will not be aimed so high. I have a witness to your threats, your trespassing, and your attempted theft. The marshal is on his way. Now, for the last time, get off my land." Sterling stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He saw her then, not as a plump widow, but as an adversary. He saw the iron in her spine, the fire in her eyes, and the unwavering man standing beside her. He had miscalculated completely. Defeated, and with the threat of the law looming, he had no choice. "This isn't over," he spat, but his words were hollow. He motioned for his men, and they turned their horses, riding away into the darkness not as conquerors, but as routed thugs. Silence descended on the yard, thick and profound. The air smelled of gunpowder and crisp night air. Eleanor's arms ached from the weight of the rifle, and a tremor ran through her body as the adrenaline began to fade. Silas gently took the Winchester from her hands and leaned it against the house. He didn't speak. He just stood there beside her, a solid, reassuring presence in the quiet aftermath. She turned to face him, the moonlight catching the profound relief and gratitude on her face. "Silas," she began, but words failed her. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently brush a stray piece of splintered wood from her shawl. The simple gesture was more intimate than any embrace. His eyes held hers, and in their clear, gray depths, she saw everything he couldn't say. He saw her, and she saw him. "That offer you made," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "When you first woke up." A shadow of the old shame crossed his face. "Eleanor, Let me finish," she insisted softly. She took a step closer, closing the small space between them. She reached up and laid her hand on his rough, bearded cheek. He flinched almost imperceptibly at the contact, as if enused to a gentle touch. It was a desperate plea from a man with nothing left. But what I am offering you now is a choice. From a woman who has everything to give, she looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. Let me remain, Silas Kane. Let me remain in your life, as you have in mine. A powerful emotion washed over his face. Awe, disbelief, a dawning, fierce joy. He slowly covered her hand with his own, his calloused palm enveloping hers. He didn't need words. His answer was in his touch, in the way he leaned into her hand, in the way his gaze softened with a devotion that went deeper than any promise. The mountain man and the widow stood on the porch of their home, the immediate danger past, a vast and hopeful future stretching out before them under the quiet canopy of stars. He had come seeking shelter and offered his body. She had offered him a job and found a partner. Together, they had found a home. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. Her true worth was finally seen. What does true value in a person mean to you? Tell us below.